Sixth, why is Washington supporting the Russian and Chinese campaigns to annihilate parts of their Muslim populations? The answer? Because we tend to see our war with Islamists as a series of isolated conflicts and not as an integrated whole, upon which issues we regard as unrelated. And not as an integrated whole, upon which issues we regard as unrelated are nonetheless having a significant impact. This is the case with Russia and China. We therefore must stop building Muslim hatred by supporting Russia in the North Caucasus and Beijing in Western China. Moscow will do what it must do to win in the North Caucasus, because its territorial sovereignty and its energy future are at stake there. Our rhetorical support for what Moscow calls its part of the global war on terrorism, however, deeply stains us in the Muslim world. In China, Beijing is conducting an ethnic genocide against Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province by flooding the Uyghur homeland with Han Chinese, exactly as it is doing in Tibet. There is no reason for America to support this silent genocide by inundation, which currently is being underscored for Muslims by our threats of an Olympic boycott over Tibet and our absolute silence about Beijing's murderous campaign against its Muslim population. Today, we are very publicly making bin Laden's point for him. The rhetoric of Washington and its allies in defense of Tibet, coupled with his silence over the Uyghurs, is perceived by Muslims as yet more proof of bin Laden's contention that the West considers the lives of Muslims to be worthless and will do little to protect them. Seventh, why has the US government failed since 1991 to secure the former Soviet Union's nuclear arsenal, leaving a chance for an Islamist nuclear attack in America? Quite frankly, there is no reasonable or responsible explanation for this appalling fact. It is a willful, knowing, and quite possibly a calamitous failure of foresight and leadership by the last two administrations. We must complete the program to help Russia secure the FSU's 22,000 nuclear weapons, an effort reduced by the last two administrations. Full security for those weapons is infinitely more important than haranguing the Russians about their failure to build a Western-like democracy. 17 years after the USSR's dissolution, Senator Lugar, the co-sponsor of the US-Russia control program, has said that success in that program is still very far off. Thus, Al-Qaeda has had a 17-year window to procure a weapon it has sworn to use in the United States in an attack for which it has religious sanction to kill 10 million Americans. Eighth, with talk about war with Iran again in the air, why has no binding Senate resolution been passed to forbid this president and all future presidents from starting premeditated offensive conflicts without the formal declaration of war by Congress that the Constitution requires? The only accurate answer is that Congress has been derelict on this issue. We must force the Congress to end its willing abdication to the executive of its sole power to declare war by electing representatives pledged to restoring constitutionality and therefore sanity to our war-making process. Infamously, no Congress has declared war since December 8th, 1941. And yet we have repeatedly seen the American people dragged into wars because one man and his advisors have decided it is the right thing to do. Resolutions allowing the president to use military force offensively are cowardly acts that surrender constitutional prerogatives in a manner that allows senators and congressmen to have it both ways. They can applaud the troops if the war goes well, or they can snipe at and undermine the president if a war goes belly up. Our post-war history is littered with failed wars that were initiated by the president and which divided Americans amongst themselves. Perhaps the restoration of the founders' intent on this issue will allow us both to win wars abroad and not to wage them against each other at home. Ninth, with Senator McCain recently stating that it is obvious that a U.S. withdrawal from Iraq would place Israel in grave danger. And having had both he and Senator Obama publicly pledge to protect Israel's security as if, as Senator Obama said, it is a sacred duty, is there any real chance of U.S. forces leaving Iraq in the foreseeable future? Obviously, the Piper's bill is now coming due, for our political class's patently absurd and even mindless contention that U.S. and Israeli national security interests are identical. Currently, America's Israel First neoconservatives in their journals, people like Douglas Feith and Paul Wolfowitz, Norman Doritz and William Crystal, Bernard Lewis and Victor Hansen, and journals such as the Weekly Standard, the National Review, and Commentary, are, with almost biblical justice, reaping the yield of the hubristic seeds they deliberately planted, namely, the idiot idea that a state could be created in Muslim Iraq that would not be anti-Israeli. The reality is that Israel's national security was severely and permanently compromised from the moment the US-led invasion of Iraq began. Moreover, it is not a fixable situation, because a potentially pro-Israel regime in Iraq exists only in the ahistorical and fervent imaginings of the neoconservatives, who are, when all is said and done, Israel's worst and most lethal enemies. The cost of unqualified and virtually unlimited U.S. support for Israel has heretofore been measured in the expenditures of dollars and political capital, and as such has been acquiesced in or ignored by Americans, who are inured to their government's prodigal waste of national assets. We now have transitioned into a situation where the cost of such support for Israel is now being measured in the blood and lives of the children of American parents. The cost will quickly become obvious and, I think, abhorrent and utterly unacceptable to those parents. We are, I think, on the cusp of the unraveling of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And for whatever disasters that entails for the Jewish state, Israelis will have the neoconservatives and the U.S. politicians in both parties they manipulate to thank. 10th, why do the candidates claim to follow the founders' foreign policy advice when the founders warned that overseas intervention to build democracies would destroy our republic? The answer? Because they are lying. We must stop trying to spread democracy abroad by military, financial, humanitarian, or political intervention. No young American should die for the insane goal of giving the people of Iraq a possibility for embracing democracy, a phrase used ad infinitum by President Bush and other Western leaders. No small R Republican government like ours has the right to spend the lives of its young in military crusades for such patently unobtainable abstractions as gaining liberty, justice, and democracy for foreigners. U.S. foreign policy must revert to what it was before the anomaly called the Cold War gave license to U.S. politicians to become democracy-mongering interventionists. Foreign policy defends who we are. It does not and cannot define who we are. Foreign policy need do only one thing: protect America so as to allow the domestic expansion of liberty, freedom, and equality of conditions. If no additional foreigner ever votes in an election, America will be no worse off. Washington's effort to build democracies abroad has a track record of making America less safe, not more safe. And, may I ask, is there a better definition of pure waste than spending the lives of our Marines or soldiers so Mrs. Mohammed can vote in the Iraqi or Afghan parliament? The post-Cold War democracy crusading U.S. administrations have impoverished us in treasure, blood, domestic political unity, and what Abraham Lincoln once called the rightful influence of our Republican example. We must return to the founders' goal for America. That is to be the well-wisher of freedom of freedom and independence for all, but the champion and vindicator only of our own.